Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's English class. It is Sunday, it's warm and sunny outside, and I am very happy to be here with you. Today, we're going to be looking at a very interesting and informative topic. What to say when you don't know what to say. Sounds a bit complicated, right? Well, not so much. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're having a discussion with someone and they probably said something you didn't understand? Well, I can tell you that that has happened to me several times in the past. And of course, there are different reasons why maybe we didn't understand what the person said. Well, today we're going to be looking at some of those possible reasons why we didn't understand what was said, and more importantly, what we can say when we don't understand. Let's get into it. Let's go back to the question that I asked earlier. Has someone ever asked you a question, but you didn't understand what they asked? Well, some possible reasons you didn't understand are, let's look at three reasons. The first one is, my speaking partner spoke very fast. Now, of course, this is something I'm guilty of. I'm a native English speaker. I'm comfortable speaking my own language. And more often times than not, I'm speaking with someone who also understands my language, who understands what I say. And because of that, I'm able to communicate at a pace that is comfortable for me. So if you're learning English and your speaking partner is speaking really fast, that could deter you from understanding all that they're trying to say. So that's a possible reason why maybe you didn't understand something that was said in the past. Of course, it is something that I have to be conscious of, especially when I'm teaching the language. I have to keep reminding myself, these are learners of the language. They can't understand as quickly as you're able to speak, right? So you have to slow it down. And that's, of course, something that I keep reminding myself, slow it down a bit, right? Just so that you can understand better. Another possible reason, maybe why you didn't understand something that was said in the past, is because your partner used a word or a phrase that you weren't familiar with. And of course, again, you're learning a new language. Your vocabulary might not necessarily be as extensive as someone who has been learning the language for a very long time, or even better yet, a native speaker of the language. So your vocabulary might not necessarily be as wide. And if your partner uses a word or a phrase that you don't understand, it could completely throw you off. In other words, you might not be able to get the meaning of what they're saying. Or if they asked you a question, then you might not even know how to respond because they used a word or a phrase that blew your mind, right? Very good. So that's another reason why you possibly didn't understand something that was said in the past. A third reason is that of accent. Now, you have several people around the world who speak English as their native language, right? But of course, the accents may be different. So you're learning the language, and that in itself might be a struggle for you. And here you go again, having to deal with understanding different accents. That too can also be a challenge. It's not anything that is impossible for you to overcome in terms of understanding, but I can understand it being a challenge for you. You're learning new words, and at the same time, you also have to try to understand the person's accent. So these are three common factors why sometimes you're not in a position to answer a question that is asked or even understand something that is being said. So we have looked at three possible reasons why you weren't able to understand something that someone said to you in the past, right? Now we're going to be looking at what should I do? So you find yourself in that situation where you're having a conversation with someone. So I want you to visualize with me. You're talking with someone, possibly a native English speaker. They say something you don't understand. Maybe they use a word, a phrase. Maybe they're speaking too fast. Maybe it's an issue with their accent. Any of the possibilities that we discussed previously. For whatever reason, you're not understanding what the person is saying. What will you do? Well, you might reason it out to say, well, you know what? I don't understand what this person is saying. I need to end this conversation right now. You might use an excuse. Oh, look at the time. I need to go. And you might use that as an excuse to get away from the conversation. It's almost as if you're running away from the person in fear of the person realizing that you don't understand what they're saying. So that's one option. You might choose to run away, right? Hopefully not. Another option is that you could say, well, I'm just going to pretend as if I understand what the person is saying. Now, can you imagine talking with someone and they ask you a question maybe, or maybe they make a point and they're expecting you to say something else in return. And you're like, yes, really? And they're like, what is happening here? I just asked the person a question, but maybe you didn't even hear the question, or maybe you didn't even understand that they just asked the question. That too can be an option. Maybe you smile and say, oh yes, and you're pretending to understand when in truth and in fact, you really don't understand what the person just said, right? So that's a second option, and that's not the correct way to go about it. Good? Let's look at the third option. You could say to the person, well, you just used a word or a phrase that I don't understand. Can you explain it for me? That's the better option, right? Ask the person either to repeat what they just said. Maybe they spoke too fast. Can you repeat that for me? Or you just used the word. You just used the phrase. I don't understand it. Can you elaborate? Can you give me more details where that is concerned? I don't understand, right? So it is better for you to ask the person to help you to understand what was said. So we have established that if we are not clear about what someone has said, then we're not going to run away from the conversation. We're not going to pretend as if we understand what the person say. Rather, we are going to ask them to explain to us what was said, right? All right. So we are in a formal situation. We are talking to our boss, for example, or we're talking to our coworkers, or we're in a professional setting. It doesn't matter the professional setting. Someone says something to you and you don't understand. We're going to be looking at some of the things that you can say to ask the person for help. The first thing that we could possibly say is, can you explain what blank means? You're in discussion with someone, they use a word. You're not familiar with the word. You need help with explaining, with understanding what that word means. So you say to the person, can you explain what blank means? Let's look at the word tardy, for example. Tardy. Now that word tardy means late, but the person uses the word and you don't know what that word means. So you're going to say, can you explain what tardy means? For example, right? Very good. So that's one thing you can say. Another thing you can say using a formal language is, please cite an example that will help me to understand what you're saying. Now, if you're like me, I do very well with examples. So if someone is explaining something to me or they're saying something to me and I don't understand, what helps me most of the times is if that person is able to use an appropriate example to help me to understand what they're saying. So if you're like me and you want the person to use an example to help you, then you could say, please cite an example that will help me to understand what you're saying. Now, a third formal expression you can use is, I'm not quite sure I understand what you just said. Again, maybe the reason why you don't understand is because of an accent issue, or maybe the person spoke too fast. In that case, you can say, I'm not quite sure I understand what you said. So the person will turn around and explain in maybe in a simpler way what they just said, or they might use an example, or they might ask you, what part of what I said don't you understand? Because it could be a situation where you're having a discussion with someone and you understand the conversation up to a point, but then they use a word, or maybe they start talking very fast and they said something that you're not very clear about. You can say to them, well, I understood you when you said this, and I understood you when you said that, but I'm not quite sure what you said after that. I don't understand what you said after that. So in a situation like that, you could say, I'm not quite sure I understand what you just said. Another formal expression is, can you rephrase what you just said and use simpler words to explain? Now, this again is a very good expression you can use if the person is using words that are probably not a part of your vocabulary, right? So they use a word. Let's go back to the word tardy. Can you rephrase what you just said and use a simpler word to explain? So maybe the person says, Amanda is always tardy. Instead of saying Amanda is always tardy, the person could say what they said before and then use a simpler word like late, right? Because that word is a part of your vocabulary. So the person could say, I don't like the fact that Amanda is always late instead of tardy. Another expression you can use, another formal expression that you can use when you don't understand is, I'd appreciate it if you spoke slowly. So if you're speaking with someone and they're talking really fast and you're not able to understand or fully grasp what they're saying, then you could say something like, I'd appreciate it if you spoke slowly. Very good. Let's move on to the sixth formal expression. I'm not familiar with that expression. Maybe again, the person uses an uncommon or an unfamiliar expression. For example, I'm so frustrated at work. They're giving me a basket to carry water. Maybe you've never heard that expression. They're giving me a basket to carry water. In other words, you don't probably have enough resources to work with. At the same time, your boss is expecting you to produce a lot and to work really hard and to be able to give him all the work that he wants. But at the same time, he's not giving you or providing you with the resources that you need to get the work done, right? So they're giving me a basket to carry water. That's an expression that you might not necessarily be familiar with. And so you can say to that person, oh, you just used a new expression. I'm not familiar with it. Can you tell me what it means? Right? Very good. And the seventh and last formal expression is, please elaborate. What do you mean by? Your coworker is explaining a process to you. Maybe it is something that you're supposed to do, but it is a process. It's a step-by-step process, and your coworker is trying to explain, but you don't understand. Or maybe in your opinion, they have not given you the details. You don't understand because it's not detailed enough. So if the explanation is not detailed enough, you could say something like, please elaborate. What do you mean by? Or maybe again, a word, an unfamiliar word is used. You're having a conversation with someone, they use an unfamiliar word. You could also say, Please elaborate. What do you mean by? So again, these are some of the formal expressions that we can use when we don't understand what someone is saying. I said it before. We don't run away from conversations. We don't pretend as if we understand what the person is saying. Rather, we ask the person to explain for us. And if you're in a professional setting or you're having a formal discussion with someone, then these are some examples or some expressions that you can use to ask for help. So usually when we're talking to our friends, we're quite comfortable. And as a result of that, we'll speak in a very casual way. We tend to use informal expressions when we're talking to our friends. So we're talking to a friend and they use an expression or they say something that we don't understand. And we need them to clarify what they just said. Let's look at some of the informal expressions that we can use when we're asking our friends for help. Now, one typical expression is, I don't have a clue what you're talking about, right? So I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And let me give you an example where this expression would be best suited. So you're talking to a friend and your friend says, hey, let's go sightseeing. You're on vacation. And your friend says, hey, why don't we go sightseeing? You could be like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. So that word sightseeing is unfamiliar, right? It's not a part of your vocabulary. You don't know that word. And so you would say something like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Right there and then, your friend will seek to explain what that word sightseeing means. Another informal expression is, what? Right? And I think this is a common one. We all use this one, especially again, as I said, when we're talking to friends. So your friend says something you don't understand. It could be a word. It could be a phrase. It could be that they're speaking too fast. It could be an accent issue again. You say something like, what? One word, right? What? And automatically they know that you didn't understand what they just said and they'll need to explain for you or to rephrase it, whatever they might choose to do to help you to understand better what they're saying. And an example is, so you and your friend again, both of you are talking, and your friend says, his behavior was absurd. Again, here you go, not understanding a particular word, this word absurd. But instead of saying absurd, what does absurd mean? Yes, instead of saying all of that, you're talking to your friend, you say, what? Right? In other words, please clarify. I don't know what absurd means. Another informal expression is, I can't wrap my head around it, right? I can't wrap my head around it. And when we say we can't wrap our head around it, what we mean is that we don't understand. Well, all of these expressions, we don't understand. I can't wrap my head around it. So, example, he used several examples to explain the rules, but I could not wrap my head around it. In other words, even though he used several examples, I still couldn't understand what he was saying, right? So you're talking with your friend says something, maybe they're explaining something, you don't understand. You say, you know what? I can't wrap my head around what you're saying. In other words, I can't understand what you're saying. These informal expressions, they're fun, yes? And as native English speakers, we use them a lot. Good. I always say to students, if you want to sound like a native English speaker, use our informal expressions where applicable, right? Where applicable and when applicable, use our informal expressions. Another one is, I don't follow you. Yeah. So again, you're talking with someone, they're explaining something or they've just said something you don't understand. You say, I don't quite follow you. Can you repeat that? Again, this one is quite applicable when someone is explaining a process. For example, I don't quite follow you. Can you repeat that? Right? Or Again, it could also be that the person is speaking fast, and that's your way of saying to them, can you please slow down? And the final informal expression is, I'm lost. Woo! Somebody says to you, I'm lost. It really means I don't understand what you're saying, right? I'm at a loss. I have no clue what you're talking about. I don't understand what you're saying. So I'm lost. I don't understand anything you just said. So you can have fun with these informal expressions and use them. Guys, remember, you're learning a new language, and the best way for you to fully grasp the language and to be able to speak fluently and to understand it clearly is to use some of these expressions. So don't put them aside. Select one or two of these examples that you really like, expressions that you really like, and use them. It makes the conversation interesting, and you will feel more comfortable, and you definitely feel as if you're learning, and you'll almost feel as if you're a native speaker of the language. So make sure that you use the expressions. Well, we have come to the end of today's lesson, and I am hoping that you benefited from the information that I shared with you today. I also want to use this opportunity to encourage you guys just to continue to practice and continue to work hard. I know for some of you, you have expressed in the past, oh, I'm feeling frustrated because I'm not speaking as fluently as I want to speak, or I'm not learning as quickly as I want to learn. All of that is understandable. But I want you to enjoy the process. It is a process. Learning the language, it's new. Learning a language is a process. It takes time, but I want you to enjoy it. Use every opportunity you can to learn something new in English. And importantly, if you have a question, make sure to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. It doesn't matter what it is. If you don't understand something, you ask. We spoke about that in today's lesson. We said we don't run away from conversations, right? We don't pretend to understand what we don't understand. What do? We ask questions. We ask for help. Of course, that will help you to develop yourself day by day. So if you have a question for me, please put it down there in the comment section, and I will definitely respond to you. Take care of yourselves, guys. I am here to help you. So reach out to me, ask whatever questions you have, and I'll most definitely get back to you. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and see you soon.